The morning Clara Bennett buried her husband, the sky was the same pale gray it had been on the day she learned she was pregnant. It felt like the world itself had decided to drain all its color at once. She stood beside the fresh mound of earth in her black dress, one hand resting unconsciously on her swollen belly, the other gripping the cold edge of grief she could barely contain. She was 23, a widow before she had truly learned how to be a wife. The town of Dry Creek was small enough that everyone attended the funeral, but not all their eyes were kind. Some were heavy with pity, others with calculation. A young pregnant widow was not just a tragedy in the West, it was a problem. Clara could feel the whispers even through the wind that rustled the dry grass around the cemetery. How will she survive alone? Who will take responsibility now? That child won't last a winter without a father. They had loved her husband, Thomas Bennett. He had been a quiet man, a carpenter who worked hard and smiled softly. When the fever took him in the space of 4 days, it left Clara with nothing but half-finished nursery furniture, unpaid debts, and a future that suddenly looked terrifyingly narrow. After the burial, she returned to their small rented cabin at the edge of town. Everything inside still smelled of him: sawdust, pine, and the faint sweetness of soap. His boots stood near the door where he had left them. His workbench held a half-carved rocking horse meant for a baby he would never meet. That first night alone, the loneliness became unbearable. The bed felt too wide, the silence too loud. When the pain overtook her, she wept not in loud sobs, but in quiet, broken breaths, afraid that if she cried too hard, she might shatter completely. Her baby shifted inside her, a small, stubborn reminder that she was not truly alone, but that she was entirely responsible now. The next weeks were harder than she had imagined. Without Thomas's income, the money vanished quickly. The landlord, though polite at first, made it clear he would not wait long for rent. The general store began allowing her purchases on credit, but even that kindness came with limits and quiet judgment. Clara tried to work. She took in mending, sewing torn shirts and patching trousers for ranch hands who paid her in coins and sometimes in food. Her fingers grew sore and cramped, but she was grateful for every small payment. Still, it was never enough. Her pregnancy became more visible with each passing day. What had once been a gentle curve became an undeniable testament to her vulnerability. Some townspeople were kind, especially the older women, but others grew distant. A pregnant widow reminded people of death and responsibility, and many preferred not to be reminded at all. One afternoon, after a long day of sewing that left her dizzy with exhaustion, Clara attempted to carry a sack of flour back to her cabin. Halfway home, her strength failed her. The sack fell, spilling white dust across the dirt road like quiet snow. She sank to her knees and stared at it in despair. It was then that she heard the sound of hooves. The horse stopped nearby, and a man dismounted. His shadow fell over her, tall and steady. "Miss Bennett?" he asked gently. She looked up into the sun and had to shield her eyes. The man before her was broad-shouldered and sun-worn, with the look of someone who spent his life outdoors. His name was Ethan Cole, the owner of the largest ranch outside Dry Creek. He was known as a quiet, serious man, respected but distant. A widower himself, though people rarely spoke of it openly. "I'm sorry," Clara said quickly, trying to gather the spilled flour with trembling hands. "I'll clean this." "Please," he interrupted, kneeling to help her. "Don't trouble yourself." Together, they salvaged what they could: When he stood, he studied her with concern. "You shouldn't be lifting such weight in your condition," he said quietly. She stiffened, accustomed now to people noticing her belly before her face. "I don't have much choice, sir." Ethan paused, his gaze softening. "I didn't mean offense." "I know," she said quickly. "It's just difficult." He hesitated only a moment before lifting the sack easily onto his own shoulder. "Allow me to walk you home." She wanted to refuse out of pride, but her body betrayed her. Her legs shook, and the truth was undeniable. She was exhausted. She nodded in gratitude. During the short walk, they exchanged only a few words. He asked after her health. She asked after the winter cattle. It was polite, distant, but something in his presence felt grounding, steady in a way she hadn't felt safe in for months. When they reached her cabin, he placed the flower inside. His eyes lingered briefly on the unfinished crib in the corner and the rocking horse on the workbench. "You're doing this alone," he said quietly, not as a question. She swallowed hard. "Yes." He nodded once, as if making note of something important. "If you need firewood this winter, send word to my ranch. I'll have it delivered." Before she could protest, he touched the brim of his hat and left. That single act of kindness might have meant little to him, but to Clara, it felt like a lifeline thrown across stormy waters. Yet, kindness alone could not change her reality. Winter crept closer. Her belly grew heavier. Work became harder to find. Some men grew uncomfortable hiring her. Others grew inappropriate. Shame and fear followed her like shadows. One evening, the landlord came. He stood in the doorway with his hat in hand, his expression stiff. "Mrs. Bennet," he began, "I've been patient, but rent is 2 months overdue." Tears filled her eyes, but she held her voice steady. "I will pay you. I just need more time." He shook his head slowly. "Time won't keep the cold out. I'll give you 3 weeks. After that, I'll need the cabin." When the door closed behind him, her strength broke. She sank to the floor, clutching her belly as panic took hold. 3 weeks. 3 weeks before she and her unborn child would be homeless in a town that was already looking past her. That night, she made a decision that filled her with both shame and desperation. She would go to Ethan Cole's ranch, not to beg, but to ask for work. The journey took nearly an entire day on foot. By the time she reached the ranch gates, her back ached, her feet were swollen, and fear gnawed at her chest. She had no right, she told herself. He owed her nothing, but survival left little room for pride. When Ethan saw her standing at the fence, pale and wind-lashed, his face hardened with concern. "What are you doing all the way out here?" he asked, hurrying toward her. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I need work, Mr. Cole. Any work at all. I need to stay in town until my baby is born. I'll clean, cook, anything." He studied her carefully, his jaw tightening. His gaze drifted to her belly once more, and something unspoken moved behind his eyes. "There are safer ways to ask," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have come alone." "I didn't have anyone else to ask," she replied. For a long moment, the wind stirred the tall grass between them. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Come inside," he said. "We'll talk." As she followed him toward the large ranch house, Clara had no idea that this walk, taken out of fear and desperation, was the first step toward a proposal that would change both their lives forever. Clara followed Ethan into the ranch house with hesitant steps. The building was large but simple, solid wood, wide windows, and a warmth that contrasted with the biting wind outside. The air smelled faintly of coffee and hay. It was the kind of home built for function rather than show. Yet it carried the quiet comfort of long, honest labor. "Sit," Ethan said gently, pulling out a chair at the long wooden table. She lowered herself carefully, one hand pressed to her aching back. Her fingers trembled in her lap. Every instinct told her she was intruding into a world that did not belong to her anymore. Wealth and stability were things she no longer trusted. Ethan poured her a cup of warm tea, without asking, and set it before her. "Drink," he said. "You're shaking." She obeyed, the warmth easing her tight chest a little. Only after she had taken several slow sips did he sit across from her. "Now tell me what brought you all the way out here in your condition," he said. Her eyes filled instantly. She hadn't intended to cry, but the exhaustion of holding everything together finally cracked. "I'm being turned out of my cabin," she whispered. 3 weeks. I tried everything, sewing, cleaning, mending, but no one wants to hire a pregnant widow for long. I just need work. Something steady, until my baby is born." Ethan listened in silence, his hands folded on the table. When she finished, the room felt painfully still. "You should have come sooner," he said finally. "I didn't want charity," she replied quickly. "I just want to earn my keep." He regarded her carefully. "There's a difference between charity and responsibility." She didn't understand what he meant, but his voice softened. "I lost my wife 8 years ago," he said quietly. "She died in childbirth. The baby didn't survive either." Clara's breath caught. She hadn't known that. People in town spoke of Ethan as a widower, but rarely mentioned how or why. The grief in his eyes, still raw despite the years, explained the silence. "I couldn't save them," he continued. "Since then, I've kept my distance from anything that reminds me of what I failed to protect." His gaze fell to her belly. "You remind me," he admitted. Her hands tightened in her lap. "Then I should go." "No," he said firmly. "That's not what I meant." He stood and paced slowly near the window. "There is work here, cooking, cleaning. The hands need meals. I won't pretend it will be easy, but it's steady and it's safe." Relief swept through her, nearly buckling her knees. "Thank you," she whispered. "I won't disappoint you." Ethan shook his head. "You won't be living in the bunkhouse. You'll stay in the east room of the main house, near the kitchen. It's warmer." She hesitated. "That wouldn't be proper." "Proper doesn't keep a child alive in winter," he said curtly, though not unkindly. She nodded, overwhelmed by gratitude. For the first time since Thomas died, Clara slept that night without fear of being thrown into the cold. The weeks that followed changed her life in quiet, unexpected ways. She worked as much as her strength allowed, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, tending to cleaning and laundry during the day. Though the labor was demanding, the men treated her with surprising respect. Word had traveled quickly that she was under Ethan Cole's protection. For the first time in months, she ate well. For the first time, the worry lines on her face began to soften. And yet, living under the same roof as Ethan stirred something complicated inside her. They rarely spoke at first. He kept his distance, returning late from the fields, often eating alone. But Clara couldn't help noticing the small things. The way he checked the stove before she went to bed to ensure the fire would last through the night. The way he left extra blankets folded outside her door without comment. The way he made sure she never lifted heavy buckets herself. Slowly, Conversation began to grow between them. One night, while she was peeling apples for a pie in the quiet kitchen, he stopped in the doorway. "You move carefully these days," he observed. "The baby grows heavier every week," she replied with a tired smile. He hesitated, then asked quietly, "Did you want a boy or a girl?" She blinked at the unexpected question. "I don't care. I just want my child to live." He nodded once. "That's the right answer." From then on, something shifted. Their conversations became more natural. Sometimes they spoke late into the evening by the fire, about the land, about loss, about the quiet fear that followed both of them like a second shadow. Yet beneath all that comfort lay a tension neither of them dared name. The town noticed too. Whispers spread quickly. "The widow lives at Cole's place now. He's keeping her. Must be more than work that keeps her there." Clara heard the rumors when she went into town for supplies. Heads turned, eyes judged. Shame burned in her chest, even when she knew she had done nothing wrong. One afternoon, after returning from Dry Creek with tear-reddened eyes, Ethan confronted her gently. "Someone said something to you," he stated. She tried to deny it, but the truth spilled out. "They think I'm your mistress," she whispered. "They think I sold myself for shelter." His jaw tightened visibly. "You owe no one explanations." "But my child will bear their judgment," she said. "And I cannot protect him alone." That night, Ethan did not sleep. He sat in his study, staring at the fire long after the house went quiet. His life had been orderly, predictable, and lonely, intentionally so. He had sworn never again to tie his heart to something that could be taken from him. Yet fate had placed a pregnant widow under his roof, and every protective instinct in him had awakened. 3 days later, he knocked on her door. "May I come in?" he asked formally. She nodded, confused. He didn't sit. He stood rigid, as if bracing himself against something unseen. "You are correct," he said. "Your child will face judgment and danger, and the same cruelty that nearly drove you from town." Her heart sank. "I know." He exhaled slowly. "A father's name shields a child in this world." Her breath caught. "I am offering you more than work," he continued. "I am offering you a family." She stared at him in stunned silence. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not for love if you cannot, but for protection, for stability, for the child who will need a father's name." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "You would do this, knowing the baby isn't yours?" He met her gaze steadily. "Blood does not make a family. Loyalty does." Fear and hope collided violently inside her chest. "This would bind your life to my past." "It already is," he said quietly. She looked down at her swollen belly, at the tiny life depending on her courage. "And if I refuse?" "Then you remain my employee and my guest," he said. "Nothing more will be spoken." Silence stretched between them. At last, in a trembling voice, she asked the question that mattered most. "And what about your heart, Mr. Cole?" He answered honestly. "It has been empty a long time. I do not know what it will feel again. But I know what it will not survive, losing another life I promised to protect." Her heart ached with the weight of his truth. That night, neither of them slept. By morning, a decision would be required, one that would reshape not only their futures, but the fate of an unborn child who needed a father's name more than either of them needed pride. Clara did not answer Ethan's proposal that night. She lay awake in the narrow bed of the east room, staring at the ceiling while the wind whispered against the window panes. Her hands rested protectively over her belly as thoughts tangled endlessly in her mind. A marriage without love, a vow made for survival, not the heart. Was that any better than the desperation she had already known? And yet, a father's name could shield her child from hunger, cruelty, and the endless judgment of the world. Ethan was offering safety in a land where safety was rare. By dawn, her answer was clear. When she found him in the barn that morning checking the horses, sunlight spilled through the wide doors and dust motes danced in the air. He looked up at her in surprise. "I'll accept," she said quietly. He froze, hand resting on a horse's mane. "You shouldn't do this out of fear alone." "I'm not," she replied. "I'm doing it for my child, and because you have shown me more kindness than anyone since Thomas died." His expression softened, though something conflicted still lingered in his eyes. "Very well, then it will be done properly, with respect, with honor." They were married 1 week later. There was no grand celebration, no white gown, no gathering of pleased relatives. Clara wore a simple blue dress borrowed from the cook. Ethan wore his best black coat. The ceremony took place in the tiny church at the edge of town, with only a few witnesses, 2 ranch hands, the preacher, and the cook who dabbed tears from her eyes. Some townsfolk watched from afar, curiosity outweighing kindness. They whispered that the widow had secured herself a wealthy rancher's name just in time. Others muttered that Ethan Cole had made a reckless choice. Yet when Ethan placed his coat gently around Clara's shoulders as they stepped from the church into the cold wind, the gesture silenced her doubts for a moment. That first night, as husband and wife, was quiet and painfully awkward. They stood on opposite sides of the bedroom, like strangers forced into intimacy by fate. Clara clutched her hands to keep them from shaking. Ethan kept his eyes respectfully averted. "You will always have your own space here," he said softly. "I will never force what you do not wish to give." Her throat tightened. "Thank you." They slept in the same room, but barely. The distance between their bodies felt as wide as fear itself. Days passed, then weeks. Outwardly, Clara's life grew easier. The town's whispers changed almost overnight. She was no longer the pitied, pregnant widow. She was Mrs. Cole now, wife of a respected rancher. Heads lowered. Voices softened. Doors opened where they had once closed. Yet inside the walls of the ranch house, the marriage felt like a careful dance on unsteady ground. They shared meals. They spoke politely. They moved around one another like 2 wounded souls afraid of touching a scar. At night, Clara sometimes cried quietly into her pillow, mourning a love that had been forced into memory before it could age naturally. She still dreamed of Thomas, his laugh, his hands dusted with sawdust, the half-finished rocking horse. And Ethan fought his own battles in silence. He slept poorly, waking often from dreams of blood and childbirth and loss. Though Clara never heard his nightmares, she sometimes found him at dawn, already awake, staring into the fireplace with haunted eyes. One evening, in an attempt to bridge the silence between them, Clara carried 2 cups of coffee into the living room where Ethan was reading. "Will you sit with me?" she asked timidly. He looked surprised, but nodded. They spoke of small things at first. The coming winter, the stubborn mare that kept escaping her stall, the growing cattle prices in town. Then suddenly Clara said, I still love my husband. Ethan's hand stiffened around his cup. I would expect nothing else. I didn't mean to hurt you, she hurried. I just don't want you to think that I married you with a heart empty of grief. I know grief well enough to recognize it in others, he said quietly. She studied his face, brave enough now to ask, Do you still love your wife? He was silent for a long time. Then he answered honestly, I do not know who I am loving when I remember her anymore. The woman I lost has been frozen in memory for 8 years. I love the ghost of her, perhaps more than the truth. In that shared confession, something subtle shifted. They did not become lovers that night, but they became less like strangers. As the months passed, Clara's pregnancy reached its final stage. Her body grew heavy and slow, her steps careful. Ethan arranged everything with silent efficiency. A midwife from the neighboring town, extra firewood, warm blankets, clean sheets. On the night her labor began, the storm arrived with it. Wind howled against the walls, snow piled thick at the doors. The ranch was cut off from the outside world in white silence. By the time Clara cried out in pain, Ethan knew the midwife would never make it in time. Panic surged through him. He was not ready to face childbirth again, not after the last time had taken both his wife and his unborn son. But he did not run. He stayed at Clara's side through every hour of screaming pain, holding her shaking hands, wiping her brow, speaking calm words, even as terror clawed at his chest. The cook did what she could, but it was Ethan who never once loosened his grip. You are not alone, he repeated again and again, as if the words were for himself as much as for her. I will not leave you. At dawn, when the storm finally quieted, their child was born, a boy. His first cry rang through the house like a promise. Clara wept with relief as Ethan stared at the tiny, red-faced infant placed into his arms. His hands trembled violently, but he did not let go. Tears streamed silently down his weathered face. He's alive, he whispered, as if afraid the truth might vanish if said too loudly. Clara watched him in wonder. The man who had built walls around his heart now stood broken open by a child that was not his. What shall we call him? She asked softly. Ethan swallowed hard. Samuel, after my father. And in that moment, the marriage of duty forged a bond neither of them had anticipated. Yet even as joy filled the house, unease lingered beneath the happiness. For the town might accept Ethan as the child's father in name, but blood, secrets, and suspicion had not yet finished shaping their fate. For a time after Samuel's birth, the ranch knew peace. The baby thrived in a way that felt almost miraculous after such a brutal winter. His cries were strong, his tiny hands always reaching, his dark eyes alert and curious. Clara recovered slowly, her strength returning day by day as she learned to care for her son. And Ethan, who had once sworn never again to love what he might lose, found himself rising in the night without complaint, rocking Samuel until his cries softened into sleep. To the outside world, they were a family now. Ethan Cole, respected rancher. Clara Cole, his quiet wife. Samuel Cole, their son. The town of Dry Creek gradually accepted the story it had been offered. The whispers faded into routine. Some asked gentle questions about the child's early arrival. But Ethan's calm authority ended further curiosity. No one dared challenge him openly. Yet peace built on fragile foundations never lasts long. 3 months after Samuel's birth, trouble arrived riding hard from the east. It was a cold afternoon when Clara noticed an unfamiliar rider approaching the ranch. The man's coat was travel-worn, his horse lathered with sweat. Something about the stiff angle of his body stirred unease in her chest. Ethan saw him too. The moment the rider dismounted at the gate, Ethan's expression darkened. "Stay inside," he told Clara quietly. She hesitated. "Who is it?" "A ghost better left in the past," he answered. The man removed his hat, revealing a sharp face and eyes full of restless intent. "Ethan Cole," he drawled. "Didn't think I'd ever see this place again." "Jonah Pike," Ethan replied tightly. "You should have stayed gone." Jonah's gaze wandered past Ethan and landed briefly on the house. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Looks like you finally settled down." "That's none of your concern." Jonah smirked. "Everything is my concern when money's involved." Ethan's jaw clenched. "State your business." Jonah leaned against the fence. "I've come for what I'm owed." The past crashed violently back into Ethan's life. Years earlier, after his wife's death and his withdrawal from the world, Ethan had entered into risky cattle dealings with Jonah Pike, a man known for gambling, smuggling, and skirting the law. Desperate for distraction and reckless with grief, Ethan had borrowed money to expand his holdings. When Jonah's illegal side ventures collapsed, the debt vanished with him, or so Ethan believed. Now Jonah had returned to collect. "You already paid that debt in full," Ethan said. "With interest." Jonah's grin widened. "Funny thing about informal agreements. I've got no documents that say you paid me. And my kind doesn't accept handshake deals once blood's been spilled along the trail." Ethan stiffened. "You have no proof." Jonah's eyes glittered. "I don't need proof. I need leverage." From the porch, Clara watched in quiet terror, Samuel cradled in her arms. She couldn't hear their words, but she could read the tension in the air, thick and choking. Jonah's gaze flicked back toward the house, toward Clara, toward the child. "And it seems," Jonah continued softly, "you've given me all the leverage I need." That night, Ethan told Clara everything. They sat by the fire while Samuel slept in a cradle beside them. Ethan's voice was low and heavy as he confessed the recklessness of his past, the debt, the dangerous dealings, the man he had almost become in his grief. "He will demand money I do not owe," Ethan said, "and if I refuse, he will threaten you, the child, the ranch." Clara's blood turned cold. "What will you do?" "I will protect you," he said without hesitation, "no matter the cost." The next days proved that Jonah Pike was not a man of idle threats. Strangers began appearing in town, men who lingered near the general store, who watched the road leading to the ranch. The sheriff, a timid man indebted to half the town, offered little more than quiet warnings. "These men don't play by the law," he told Ethan. "Be careful." Then the demands began. A letter arrived first. A simple note written in harsh, slanted ink. "Pay what is owed, or lose what you love." Clara found the note on the kitchen table one morning. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped it. "They know," she whispered to Ethan. "They know how to hurt us." "You and Samuel will leave the ranch for a time," Ethan said immediately. "You'll go to my sister's in Ridge Hollow. You'll be safe there." Clara's heart pounded. "I will not run while you face this alone." "I won't argue this," he said firmly. "You are my wife. This is my duty." "They are threatening our child," she cried. "He is not just yours to protect." The argument that followed was the first true fracture in their marriage. Not born of cold distance this time, but of fear and love neither of them yet knew how to name. In the end, Clara agreed to leave. She packed only what was necessary: a few clothes, Samuel's blankets, the small wooden rattle Ethan had carved for him himself. As she stood at the doorway, dread curling through her chest, Ethan took her face gently in his rough hands. "I gave you my name so the world would not harm your child," he said quietly. "I will not let my past take that protection away." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Come back to us," she whispered. "I always will." She left at dawn. 2 days after Clara's departure, Jonah Pike struck. Ethan returned from the western fields to find the barn ablaze. Flames leapt hungrily toward the sky, smoke staining the clouds black. Horses screamed in terror. 2 ranch hands were injured trying to save the livestock. The message was clear. Ethan rode into town that night and confronted Jonah in the saloon. The room fell silent as the 2 men faced each other across the wooden floor. "You torch my property and expect me to kneel?" Ethan said coldly. Jonah's smile was thin. "I expect you to pay." "I will not." Jonah leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then perhaps I should visit your wife and child." The words ignited something violent inside Ethan. He did not strike Jonah then. He restrained himself with every ounce of control he possessed. Violence in the open would only invite worse consequences. But when he left the saloon, a decision had been made. Meanwhile, in Ridge Hollow, Clara felt the pull of danger, even without knowing the latest attack. She paced her sister-in-law's small parlor restlessly, Samuel fussing in her arms. Fear whispered constantly in her thoughts. That fear proved justified when one night she heard footsteps outside the house. Before the door could be secured, it burst open. 2 men stormed inside. Jonah Pike's men. Clara screamed as Samuel was torn from her arms. One of the men struck her across the face, sending her crashing to the floor. "Tell Mr. Cole," the man snarled over the child's wailing, "that this is only the beginning." They vanished into the darkness with Ethan's son. Clara lay on the floor, blood on her lip, her world in shattered pieces. By the time Ethan reached Ridge Hollow, alerted by a frantic messenger, his wife was clinging to consciousness and his child had vanished without a trace. He fell to his knees beside her and gathered her into his arms, his voice breaking for the first time since his wife's death 8 years earlier. "They took him," she sobbed. "They took our baby." Rage, terror, and guilt consumed Ethan in one violent storm. The past had returned, not just to threaten his life, but to steal the very family he had sworn to protect. And now he would ride straight into the darkness to take his son back, no matter how much blood the trail required. Ethan rode through the night without rest. The moon hung pale and cold above the plains as his horse thundered across the frozen ground. Every breath burned in his lungs. Every heartbeat echoed one thought only: "My son is alone, and I failed him." Behind him, Ridge Hollow faded into darkness. Ahead lay Jonah Pike, the man who had taken everything from him once before, and now had dared to take his child. By dawn, Ethan had tracked the kidnapper's plan, trail into the ragged hills east of Dry Creek. Hoofprints cut sharply through the frosted earth. Ash from Jonah's burned barn still clung to Ethan's coat like the ghost of his past mistakes. He rode without fear now. Fear had been replaced by something far more dangerous: purpose. At an abandoned mining camp, hidden deep in a ravine, Ethan found them. Jonah Pike's men stood guard near a half-collapsed shack. Inside, faint crying pierced the cold morning air. Samuel. Ethan dismounted silently and moved with deadly patience. Years of ranch work had taught him how to move unseen, how to wait, how to strike only when the moment demanded it. When the first man turned his back, Ethan struck him down with the butt of his rifle. The second drew his pistol, but too slow. Ethan fired first. The shot echoed violently off the canyon walls. Jonah ran for the shack. Ethan followed. Inside, Jonah clutched Samuel in his arms, the baby screaming in terror. "Drop him," Ethan commanded, his rifle aimed squarely at Jonah's chest. Jonah's eyes burned with hatred and desperation. "You should have paid when you had the chance." "I paid with my wife," Ethan replied coldly, "and I paid with 8 years of grief. You will not take my son." Jonah laughed bitterly. "Your son? Everyone knows that bastard isn't yours." The words sliced through Ethan, but did not weaken him. "Blood did not make him mine," Ethan said. "Choice did." Jonah lifted the child higher, panic seeping through his bravado. "Take one more step and the baby dies." And in that instant, Ethan made the choice that would define him forever. He lowered his gun. "Then take me instead," he said quietly. "Let the child go. I'll give you everything I own. All of it. Just let him live." Jonah hesitated. It was the hesitation that killed him. From behind, Jonah's last remaining man, wounded but not dead, lunged clumsily. The motion startled Jonah. His grip loosened. Samuel slipped from his arms. Ethan lunged forward and caught his son mid-fall. The gunshot that followed rang through the ravine. Jonah Pike fell to the dirt, blood darkening his chest, eyes frozen in disbelief. Silence rushed in like a wave. Ethan dropped to his knees, clutching Samuel to his chest. The baby cried once more, then stilled when he recognized the familiar heartbeat beneath his ear. "It's over," Ethan whispered, rocking him gently. "You're safe now." Clara did not know her husband had survived until sunset. She lay in the small bedroom at Ridge Hollow, pale and broken, staring at the door as if her soul had abandoned her body. Every breath felt borrowed. When the door finally opened, and she saw Ethan standing there, dust-covered, blood-stained, and alive, her scream turned into a sob that shook her entire frame. Then she saw Samuel, alive, whole, in Ethan's arms. She collapsed before them, her legs giving way beneath her. Ethan dropped to the floor with her, setting Samuel between them. As she gathered her child, with a cry of relief that tore from the depths of her soul. "My baby," she sobbed, "my baby." Ethan watched her cling to the child he had chosen as his own, and for the first time, he fully understood what family truly meant. Not a name, not a contract, not blood, but sacrifice. Jonah Pike's death ended the threat. With his followers scattered and his crimes revealed, the town at last learned the truth of what Ethan had been protecting them from. The sheriff quietly thanked him. The townsfolk who had once whispered now lowered their eyes in respect. When Clara and Ethan returned to the ranch, the barn still stood black with fire scars, but the house remained warm. So did the hearts within it. Recovery was slow. Clara's fear lingered. She startled at footsteps. She held Samuel constantly, as if he might vanish again. But each night, Ethan sat beside her, silent and steady, a living promise that she was no longer alone. One quiet evening, months after the kidnapping, Clara stood on the porch, watching the sun sink beneath the hills, While Samuel slept in her arms, Ethan joined her. "You once asked what would become of my heart," he said quietly. "I believe I finally know." She turned to him, eyes soft but cautious. "And what of mine?" He reached out gently, letting his rough hand rest over hers and over their child. "I did not marry you for love," he said. "But somewhere between the fear and the fire, I found it anyway." Tears glistened in her eyes. "So did I." He bent and kissed her, not with urgency or desperation, but with quiet certainty. A kiss that did not belong to survival anymore, but to choice. Years passed. Samuel grew strong under the open skies of the ranch. He learned to walk in the dust of the corrals, to ride with his father's steady hands guiding him, to read by the fire from his mother's gentle voice. To the world, he was the son of Ethan Cole, and in every way that truly mattered, he was. One evening, when Samuel was 6 years old, the boy asked a question that had long lived unspoken in the house. "Pa, am I really yours?" Ethan knelt before him, placing his hands firmly on the child's small shoulders. "You are mine because I chose you," he said, "and because you chose me back every day you call me father." Samuel smiled and threw his arms around Ethan's neck. That night, Clara wept quietly with joy as she watched them together. The ranch prospered, the house filled with laughter, and the promise Ethan once made, "Your child will need a father, and I want a family," became the truest vow either of them had ever spoken. Their love was not born of romance. It was forged in loss, tempered by fear, and sealed by sacrifice. But it endured, because some families are not created by blood. They are created by courage.